There was a saying at Wenfield Manor, known only to the old servants. Alistair Gray, the 7th Duke, possessed everything, except his wife's eyes. Those eyes had shone before him for 3 years, yet he had never once looked up to meet them. It was not until the night they went completely dark that he remembered fire, too. Eventually burns out. It had rained that evening. The autumn rain of the north pricked the skin like fine needles. The Duchess did not take the carriage bearing the family crest that was meant for her. As she stepped through the estate's wrought iron gates, the hem of her skirt dragged across the wet flagstones, leaving a dark streak of water, like a wound slowly closing. No one stopped her. She moved too quietly, as silent as a ghost. And there were so many ghosts in this manor that the servants had long since learned to pretend not to see them. 3 hours earlier, the chandelier in the drawing room shone blindingly. Candles were set one by one in silver candlesticks, illuminating Etheline Gloucester's golden hair like a stream of flowing honey. She sat in the armchair closest to the fireplace, the Duchess's seat, as the housekeeper had told her from the very first day she moved into the estate. She took it with almost no hesitation, for she knew full well that no one in this estate would correct her, especially not the nominal mistress of the house. Etheline looked down and took a sip of her red tea. The sapphire brooch on her chest refracted a faint, deep blue in the light. It was a token passed down to the eldest daughter, in-law of the Wenfield family, a dowry the first Duke had received from a certain royal princess, passed down through 7 generations. And now, it was pinned to another woman's collar. The Duchess stood at the doorway for a full 10 seconds. She looked at the brooch and recalled the words her mother-in-law had spoken when she placed it in her hands before passing away. Live with it, don't end up like me, crushed by it. At the time, she hadn't fully grasped the weight of those words. Not until this afternoon, when Alistair personally took the brooch from her jewelry box and handed it to Etheline's maid right in front of her. "It's only temporary," he said, his tone as if explaining why he was temporarily requisitioning a military horse. "She's accompanying me to the court banquet tonight. The Marquis of Gloucester wishes to see the family's sincerity." She did not argue. She did not even ask, "What about my goodwill?" 3 years had taught her one thing. In the presence of this man, any statement beginning with "I" was superfluous. Her feelings within the realm of the Wenfield family were never a consideration, so she merely glanced at him, then turned and went back to her room. She sat at her dressing table for a long time, her fingers unconsciously tracing the edges of the silver jewelry box. The box was empty after the brooch had been taken. All that remained inside was a layer of fine dust that had accumulated over 3 years. She looked at that layer of dust and suddenly felt it resembled herself. Once the finery had been removed, all that was left was a dust-covered container. The jingle of a carriage bell drifted in from outside. The Duke was returning to the estate. As she descended the stairs, Alistair was standing by the fireplace speaking with the butler, his military boots still caked with mud from the training grounds. He removed his gloves and tossed them to a servant, then looked up just as she came down the stairs. She wore a long black silk gown, her hair loosely pinned at the nape of her neck, her complexion a touch paler than usual. But that was all. He did not notice something in her eyes that he had not seen in a long time. A deathly stillness, a calm that had surrendered to everything. If he had ever truly looked at her, he would have recognized that calm. It was the same look in her eyes the night his mother swallowed an entire bottle of opium tincture, the last time she appeared in the mirror. But he didn't look. He never looked. "Etheline came by this afternoon," she began, her voice drifting as if from a great distance, so faint that even the crackling of the firewood in the hearth was louder than it. He lifted his glass. The ice clinked. "She was wearing that sapphire brooch, sitting in my chair, and drank 3 cups of tea. Her father commands 30,000 private soldiers. The northern border is unstable. I need the Marquis of Gloucester's cavalry." His voice remained utterly steady as he spoke these words, as if reciting a military supply document he had approved countless times. He didn't even turn around, for she stood behind him, and he never felt the need to face her. She clutched a parchment in her palm, her knuckles turning white. She repeated those words to herself 3 times, not as a rehearsal, but simply to confirm whether she could truly go through with it. The first time, her heart pounded so hard it felt as though it would burst from her chest. The second time, her hand stopped trembling. By the third time, she realized she could no longer feel the pain in her heart. It was as if her nerve endings had been seared. Even the burning had turned to numbness. "So, is our agreement over now?" she asked. "What agreement?" he replied casually. "The marriage agreement. You gave me a title and protection, and I didn't interfere in your life. Now you don't need me as a figurehead anymore, right?" He frowned and finally turned to look at her. But what kind of look was that? It was as if he were inspecting a piece of old equipment about to be retired, assessing whether it still had any residual value. "If you think the estate in the Earl's domain is a better place to live, have someone pack you up tomorrow." He didn't say no. He didn't even hesitate. She suddenly felt like laughing. 3 years. It had taken her 3 years to make this decision, yet he'd confirmed it for her in less than 3 seconds. How efficient! It suited his status as commander, in chief of the Northern Front perfectly. "You know you were 2 hours late on our wedding day," she said. "I was standing at the altar, the hoop of my wedding dress digging into my ribs until they turned purple. The priest called for you 3 times, and your aide ran back and forth 8 times to relay the message that you were discussing border defenses. Finally, you arrived, and didn't look at me once from start to finish." His fingers tightened slightly around the wine glass, but he didn't speak. "When you swore your vows to God, your eyes were fixed on that stained glass window on the ceiling. The stained glass depiction of St. George, slaying the dragon, blood-soaked and powerful, wasn't it?" He did remember it. He even remembered the way the blood-red glass refracted the sunlight. But no matter how hard he searched his memory, he couldn't recall the color of the wedding dress she'd worn that day. White off white, or that moonlight white with a hint of gray. He didn't know. He'd never bothered to remember. "I didn't know you'd been thinking about all this." His voice was harsher than he'd intended, as if a defensive instinct had kicked in before any other reaction. "I told you, last Christmas, you had Aiselin sit at the head of the table. The hunting season before last, you let her ride my horse. 3 months ago at the court ball, you walked in on her arm, and every noble woman in the room was staring at me. I stood in the corner, holding a glass of cold champagne. I told you, every single time. But you never listened." She placed the parchment on the side table, moving slowly, as if afraid of disturbing something she shouldn't. "The divorce agreement." He glanced down at it, his brow furrowing, his face taking on an expression she knew all too well, one of tolerance and slight impatience in the face of unreasonable demands. "This is no time for tantrums." "I'm not throwing a tantrum, Alan." When he heard that name, it was as if something had suddenly stabbed him in the back of the neck. Alan, the last word his mother had uttered before she died. The old servants at the estate all knew this taboo. The 7th Duke forbade anyone from using his given name. Anyone who dared cross that line would be immediately banished to the most remote of the family's country estates. But she had spoken it. Before she left, she intended to settle everything she had owed for 3 years, all at once. "I never knew you," she said, looking at him. There were no tears in those eyes, no anger, nothing at all. They were as clear as a mirror that had been shattered and pieced back together. "I only knew His Grace the Duke. I've heard that Alan Grey, as a 7-year-old, hid behind an oak tree in the garden and cried because his father had locked his mother in a room on the 3rd floor and wouldn't let him see her. He didn't know how to open the door, so he cried there under that tree for 4 whole hours, until it started raining and the butler dragged him back." The color was slowly draining from Alistair's face. "It's a pity I married the Duke, not Alan." The corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, more like the shape of a sigh. Alan cried out all the tears he had in his lifetime when he was 7. Ever since then, every day he's lived, he's been turning into his father. The fire in the hearth suddenly burst into a shower of sparks, but he felt no heat. "Then take my place," she said, so quietly it didn't sound like a farewell, but rather as if she were recounting something that had nothing to do with her. "Now that I'm gone, you can let Aislinn and her father's 30,000 cavalry in." Everyone's happy. As she turned, the hem of her skirt swept across the floor, producing a low, continuous sound like a distant rising tide. He sat in his chair, his back stiff, not looking at her retreating figure. He was the Duke of Alistair, and he would not look at anyone's back. His father had taught him that a retreating figure was a posture of the weak. The Greys need only face forward. Her footsteps echoed through the corridor and across the hall. When the oak doors swung open, the hinges emitted a low, muffled thud, a sound as heavy as the wind from a church crypt squeezing through cracks in the stone. It was a sound he had heard all his life. Every time someone left the mansion, that door made the same sound. He had never thought it was anything special, but tonight, as that sound crashed down, his fingers tightened around the wine glass, leaving a fine crack on its surface. He did not let go, for to do so would show he cared. He could not care. His father's admonition was etched into his very bones. Emotion is the gateway to weakness, and weakness is poison to the nobility. She was gone. It didn't matter, she would return. It was cold outside, and it was raining. She hadn't brought a shawl. She hadn't even packed a change of clothes. All her jewelry remained on the dressing table, and she had even removed her wedding ring, placing it in a silver box. A note lay tucked beneath the ring. He didn't discover it until the next morning. He didn't want to go to her room, for that would suggest he was looking for her. He couldn't look for her. A duke does not go looking for a woman who has run away, even if that woman is his lawful wife. He sat in his study all night, studying military maps, only to find he hadn't memorized a single front line. At daybreak, the butler pushed open the door, his face pale, his voice hushed. "The lady hired a public carriage last night and headed south." She did not specify a destination. A public carriage. He knew what that meant. She hadn't used her noble status, hadn't dispatched any of the estate's carriages, hadn't contacted any family members who could have helped him track her down. Like a commoner, she had wrapped herself in an old cloak, climbed into a public carriage that reeked of mold and cheap tobacco on that rainy night, and driven out through the wrought iron gates of Wenfield Manor without looking back. He pushed open the door to her room. The small silver box on the dressing table lay open, the ring resting quietly inside, like a snail withdrawn into its shell. He picked up the note tucked beneath the ring, and a line of neat handwriting met his eyes. "Don't look for me. I don't blame you. I just don't want to be another version of your mother." His fingers clenched tightly, the edges of the parchment cutting deep into his palm, but he felt no pain. He stood rooted to the spot, his spine like a broken sword, finally losing the straightness it had maintained for 25 years. Outside the window, the north's rain fell harder and harder, lashing the manor's towers, the stone carving symbolizing 7 generations of the Warmfield family's glory, and the stagecoach he could not see, fading into the distance on that rainy night. Alistair Gray, the youngest and most ruthless duke in the north, suddenly felt his knees go weak. He wanted to call out the butler's name, to say send someone after it, but his lips moved a few times without a single word coming out, for in that instant, all the tears he had held back for 25 years welled up in his throat.